Thanks for joining us on this inaugural episode of OpsForYou. We're excited to be joined by Brendan Aronson, former Marine officer, entrepreneur, and investor. Now let's dive in. Have you seen your skills as a Marine officer translated into your role as an entrepreneur? Are there any kind of skills that you see yourself using particularly regularly in kind of like your entrepreneurial journey with PaintTrue or MilVet?
Question, Rich. I would say in the military, you're often told to figure it out. Sometimes there's an expletive in there as well. And as an entrepreneur, that's all you do, right? It's just figuring things out. It starts out with identifying a customer problem, figuring out how to best solve that problem. And there's no playbook. So you can read case studies of past entrepreneurs who have been successful in their endeavors. There are business models that you can study to understand how to apply those in a way that will make sense to build a business around. But for the most part, you're left to figure it out, how to solve your client or your customer's biggest problems. So I would say like being able to think outside the box and having a will to win, I would say is also something that's very relevant for military veterans. The will to win in combat, we were told at the infantry officers course in my entry-level training that it doesn't matter how hard you try. The only thing that matters is victory in combat. And similarly in entrepreneurship, you have to have a will to win because things inevitably get very hard and it's incredibly challenging to start a new business. So I would say that those things have really benefited me and continue to benefit me as a military veteran entrepreneur.
Really love that the will to win. Do you kind of see that will to win also helping you in the context of context ventures as well, kind of doing VC work, and then even in your past at Goldman Sachs?
Yeah, I would say so. I think what makes veterans such fantastic employees is that will to win, tenacity, ability to learn new things very quickly. We're constantly moving around as members of the military and learning a new job every year, every 2 years, every 3 years. And so being able to transition the soft skills you developed in the service into the hard skills that you need in a civilian job, bringing those same soft skills with you can be very beneficial.
And then with your time as a Marine, so I know you kind of brought up that will to win. Do you think there's been any other unique advantages that you had over your peers? Whether, even if we want to go kind of even back to college, I recently saw that you posted today about kind of like all the stuff you've excelled getting, your Wharton MBA, being at Goldman Sachs, and everything else you've done. Do you think that time in the Marines gave you any unique advantages through all of those spectrum of things?
I mean, I would say most military veterans, if you read my resume, I think it reads, it makes sense and there's like sort of a logical progression, but it certainly doesn't feel like that in the moment. We talked to a lot of transitioning veterans who are trying to figure out what the next steps are going to be, and I encourage them to think about the fact that everybody's story makes a lot of sense in retrospect, but there's a lot of failure along the way. You see that with folks transitioning into business careers, and you also see it with entrepreneurs especially. People talk a lot about failing as an entrepreneur, and I failed a lot. Constantly in my business career as well. And so I would say, in the military, your failures. I had a great mentor who told me that the key to great leadership is allowing your subordinates to fail without becoming a failure. And so I think that is also applicable to entrepreneurs because you're going to fail a lot. And what I tell people when they're transitioning out of the military or they're starting a company is oftentimes the more that you're failing, the more you're actually succeeding as well, because it means that you're hitting a critical amount of volume. You're getting enough repetitions at whatever the skill set is. So as an entrepreneur, if you're selling a product, you're going to fail a lot. People are going to say no all of the time. It's very common in any kind of sales environment. And so, but if you're failing a lot, that means that you're learning a lot. You're probably, hopefully, iterating very quickly, and then you have enough volume in your funnel that you're hopefully getting to yes a lot of the time as well.
With all that, what are some ways that in starting PaintTrue and PaintTrue to today as like a CEO and co-founder there that you found yourself maybe in the beginning kind of like failing, and what were your learnings from those failures?
I would say one of my biggest learnings from PaintTrue in the early innings was around sales and marketing. Coming out of the MBA program, they teach marketing from a very academic perspective. And so my co-founders got sick of me telling them, we should build some kind of like scalable, repeatable funnel. We have to figure out how we're going to do our advertising. And, one of my business partners there, who is probably one of the best business people that I know, told me, he's like, yeah, that's great. But in the short term, like pick up the phone, call some people that you know that need great gifts for something and make some sales. And that is a philosophy that it took me, a little bit of time to learn. And I think I carry it forward to this day in my current endeavors, because, I understand that perfect is the enemy of good, and you're not going to have a perfect plan from the inception. You're going to have to try a lot of different things, see what sticks, and then reinforce success when you see it. You're also just going to have to pick up the phone and get sweaty with your sales efforts. Like there's just no way around it.
Do you think kind of getting sweaty with the sales efforts has helped you kind of like in transition, not just from like paying true, but to working with context ventures, right? Where it is just a lot of you're getting outreach and you're doing outreach. And then with MilVet, kind of that same idea. Because totally correct me if I'm wrong, is MilVet more of a business or is it also more of a nonprofit? For my understanding, I just for some clarification.
Yeah, it's a for-profit business.
Okay.
All of these, you actually are spot on in recognizing that great sales processes rely on two methods of customer acquisition. There's outbound sales where you're proactively reaching out to people. It could be cold outreach, could be to someone that's warm in your network that you already know that's in a position to potentially be a buyer. And then there's inbound as well, right? So when you generate marketing, when you market your product, you get people reach out to you because they might be interested in it, right? And so for all of these different endeavors, for TheMilVet, where we help companies hire military veterans, we are employing that same sales principle in multiple ways. We have employers that we're bringing onto our company who need help hiring veterans. We are acquiring those employers both through the marketing efforts, so our posts on LinkedIn and social media, that draws people that might be interested to us. So we have inbound there, and then we have outbound. So we reach out to employers who we think might be interested, tell them the value of hiring veterans, and then work to bring them on as clients. We apply that same sales philosophy on the other side of the equation. When an employer is looking for a veteran with a specific set of skills, we rely on inbound. So we post to social media and say, hey, who might be interested in this role? And outbound, we're proactively going out and finding candidates, because a lot of times the best talent is passive. They might not be looking for a new role. So we're employing that same sales methodology there. And then for venture investing, it is a similar thing, right? We have inbound that we create through our marketing efforts. A lot of times, you see us host these live events. That's to help spread the word about what we're doing, to help us meet new entrepreneurs and to bring entrepreneurs, to us who might be interested in raising capital from us. And then there's outbound as well. So if we see a great company, we'll reach out to them to learn more about what they're building. So all sales processes really do rely on those frameworks, and they are so applicable to everything. Everything in business is sales, right? If you're selling, it's obviously a sales process. If you're hiring, right, you're selling an opportunity to someone and trying to attract the best talent in the world. If you're fundraising, that's a sales process. You're going to have to reach out to a lot of investors and generate hype about your company so that investors reach out to you. But they're all different practices of the same discipline, which is sales.
Awesome. Yeah. No. So one thing I think that people often don't realize is how much sales kind of happen inside of VC itself. So I thought it'd be something that'd be really interesting to kind of dive into here is like how you see that like getting sold to, by someone trying to get your money and then you trying to raise money as well for your fund. I think that'd be like an interesting kind of thing that usually kind of sits outside of what people are thinking about. They're just thinking about that business side, which you kind of brought up. So I'd love to dive in there if that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Tim would be my business partner. Tim, who's the general partner at Context Ventures, would probably be a better person to ask this question to, frankly, just because he's a more experienced venture capitalist. But I'll say, if you think about it from an industry perspective, the venture capital industry is extremely competitive. And you've correctly identified that venture capitalists are both raising capital from institutional investors. They're called limited partners or LPs. So they're going out and executing that same sales process to raise capital from people who are looking to deploy capital into the venture asset class. And then they're also running a sales process. Great deals are competitive to become an investor in them. There are only a handful of unicorn companies minted every year. And so, if you think back to when those companies were raising capital in their earlier stages, those are the ones that you want to find and you want to get allocation for. because venture investing there's a power law distribution where most of the returns are actually concentrated in very few companies. And so being able to successfully get into those rounds as an investor is a really critical skill set. If you can't get into good rounds, you can't be a good venture investor. And with so much capital flowing into the space in the last, call it like 15 years, it has gotten really competitive for VCs to be able to get into deals. So yeah, I mean, you find that same sales process in venture capital quite a bit. And I think you correctly identified where.
Do you think you could share any examples maybe when you're like looking at an investment, right? Because like you said, right, you maybe make 500 investments in a year, just to use big numbers, right? But only 5 of those are going to give you a real return, right? Are there any sort of skills or tactics that you use in that decision-making process, or even maybe kind of like that will to win to try and get to them early, like when you're out there just kind of hunting on the web or whatever it may be for that new bright cool thing?
Yeah, I think there's a couple questions there. First is how you evaluate deals, right? And then how you convince a founder to let you join the team as an investor. 500 investments would be a lot for a fund. They're going to make fewer investments than that. But I mean, to answer those two questions, first, when thinking about a deal from a venture capitalist perspective, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about what venture capitalists invest in. I have been guilty of this in my first startup, right? The venture investors typically look at a very defined and limited set of companies that make sense. They're looking for a company that can scale from zero to, say, $100 million in revenue very, very quickly, like a limited amount of time, 5 to 7 years, which is there's only a limited number of companies that can scale that quickly. They tend to be, SaaS businesses, software businesses. A lot of them are B2B SaaS, like something like 80% of venture investment dollars go into B2B SaaS because it is like the business model that can rapidly scale like that, right? There are other business models that make sense, like marketplaces or businesses that benefit from network effects. There's a fantastic book by Andrew Chen, who's a partner at Andreessen Horowitz, called The Cold Start Problem. I really recommend it if you're interested in network effects. It's like a dissertation on it. It's fascinating. But think about businesses that will capture dramatic amounts of market share very, very quickly because everybody's on the platform. So like LinkedIn is a great example of this. If I were to try and launch a professional networking site, the value of the site is in having a lot of other people already on it. So creating the conditions for those network effects can be really challenging. Uber is another great example. You need a critical mass of drivers and consumers on the app at the same time in the same location. Otherwise, there's no benefit to the app, which is why rideshare has similar characteristics to other network effect businesses. You tend to see those businesses end up very, very concentrated, meaning that like 70, 80% of the market share is captured by whoever is able to generate those network effects, right? That's why there's like Uber, there's Lyft, and then there's like tiny, tiny players other than that, right? Uber having like 70% of the market. So those types of businesses make for, interesting venture investments. So when a VC is evaluating a deal, they'll think about 3 things in the early stages. They'll think about the founder. What is the strength of the founder, the founding team? Because really you're investing in the team, understanding the business model itself might pivot. You'll think about the market. Is it a massive market that's growing? A great entrepreneur in a market that is declining or small will do worse than a decent entrepreneur in a large market or a market that's growing very quickly. So you've got the founder, you've got the market, and then you've got the product or idea. Does it solve a real pain point? Are there customers that are interested in this solution? Are they dying for this product, right? So those 3 things, people will sometimes use the analogy of a horse race. So they'll say, track, horse, and jockey. So the track being the market, the horse being the product or idea, and then the jockey being the founder. So that's like a loose framework I think is pretty helpful, but you also obviously have to consider the choice of business model, right? Because only certain business models make sense for venture investments. Your other question about how to get into the deal, I mean, look, I think a lot of this relies on reputation. I think venture investing is very reputational first business. So you have to be someone that a founder wants to work with, first and foremost. I don't claim to have like a very deep track record of venture investing, and I'm fairly new on the Context Ventures team. But I would hope that over time I'll build a relationship and reputation with founders that, someone that will go to bat for them, someone that will be with them, not just through the great times to take credit for their accomplishments, which I think we see a lot of VCs do, unfortunately, but rather someone that is there in the hard times when it really matters. So, that track record just takes time. It takes time to build that kind of trust and reputation. But like all great things in life, when it comes to reputation or relationship building, I think it's a byproduct of trying to do the right thing for people, regardless of what the outcome might be for yourself personally. There's a great book called Give and Take, which I really strongly recommend, by Adam Grant, which is about the power of being a giver and someone that tries to, help people as much as possible without any expectation of reciprocation. So probably a long-winded answer to your question, but hopefully helpful.
No, that was great. There's tons of good nuggets in there, because I think that kind of transitions to this other question, kind of as you brought up, kind of the investment's kind of a new side for you. And I think there were a lot of things in there that you brought up, or not a lot, but like towards the end there, about how some founders might find it, are looking for trust. And like you having your own entrepreneurial background, you're like, shit's going to be hard, and sometimes it's not, so like having that in your back pocket, do you think in working with current investments that's ever helped you, kind of like having that, oh, I've been there, kind of done it, of building your own business?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, entrepreneurs that we work with, all business is hard, like all of it. There's nobody that is in business that's like, oh yeah, it's pretty easy, it's straightforward, I got it. Because I mean, and it's funny, because as early stage entrepreneurs, I think we often think, well, when I can just get to X milestone, then it'll be a lot easier. And it is true that getting, to your initial revenue, that's a huge milestone, right? Being able to pay yourself a salary, it's a huge milestone. And that helps alleviate some of the existential dread, but it is always hard. I talked to a founder yesterday who just crossed 2 million in ARR, and he told me that how shocked he was. For years he had gone to $1 million in ARR in the previous business, he had been, I think, up to $2 million in ARR in a previous business. And he said how shocked he was at how difficult it was to get from 0 to 1 million, and how the things that they did to get from 0 to 1 million did not get them from 1 million to 2 million. And what got them to 2 million is not going to get them to 5 and 10. So, that's a long-winded way of saying entrepreneurship is very hard for every single person. So yeah, I do think that having some of those calluses myself, and I mentioned I've failed a lot and continue to fail a lot. And I do not think of myself as like a successful person. I think that's something that will hopefully be measured in decades instead of years. But yeah, I mean, it does allow you to, have a direct relationship with someone when you can say like, hey, I've been there. Like I've messed that up too. And I've made those same mistakes. I've made stupider mistakes than you have. I do think that adds like a level of authenticity and trust with our entrepreneurs. So people do come to me, when things are challenging, or they're going through like personal problems, or they are curious about what the next phase is going to hold. And, I'm able to kind of shoot it to them straight. And the quick answer is it's always hard. So
yeah, it's fair. With the kind of different skill sets, which I mean, kind of for the investor and the entrepreneur, it sounds like almost from kind of how you talked about it, there's a lot more similarities than differences, right? Because you're kind of always looking at the same things. Like, if I'm going to start a business, what are the market trends, right? Is the market going to pull me there? If I'm an investor, is the market going to pull me? Is the market going to pull our investments there? Apologies. And then for the Marine officer hat, right? That's kind of like a very different one. That's just like, I want to win, so I'm going to kind of chase down that market maybe. Do you ever find yourself kind of like second guessing the market trend, right? We saw like in the past year, a huge amount of, kind of layoffs and everything happening, and wondering, are those always the best decisions? And like, how do you kind of take that short and long sighted view when it's just like, I want to win today? Because right there might not be another battle tomorrow, right? If I don't win, if we look at it from the other Marine or military side.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to take a really long-term view on all of these things. I think one of the challenges of building a venture style company and investing in a venture capital deal is that you have a limited time horizon. It sort of accelerates the outcomes. Venture capital is best applied when it's going to accelerate someone to the next phase very quickly. and that is a company that's ready for that. So there is like this element of timing the market that's really important. If you look at a key differentiator between venture funds over the last 15 years, one of the most key differentiators is what's called its vintage, right? What year the fund was launched. So the funds that launched right after the financial crisis had a chance to invest in companies at a discounted valuation, meaning that they had an outsized ownership stake when those deals matured, right? Whereas venture funds that were investing at very frothy market conditions, meaning that the market was doing very well, those funds, they maybe got a smaller slice of the ownership structure. They maybe over deployed capital too quickly, which can be really challenging when they go to harvest those returns. So yeah, I mean, the market cycle is certainly important to consider in venture investing. And then on the company building side, I mean, it's critical for all the reasons that you mentioned, right? You want a great market that's growing. But I do think that if you don't raise venture capital, you can take a little bit of a longer time horizon, right? You can build a little bit slower. But it's still really critical to select a great market and a great business model. Like if you don't have a good business model or you're trying to sell to customers that can't pay you, that just makes it really hard to build a business doing that, So, I think choice of market selection and the timing of the market is important. That said, like you can't time the market, right? I mean, if you're a value investor, you're going to be wrong more than you're going to be right if you try and time the market. So, I think it's important to temper thoughts around market conditions with a really long-term mindset and the understanding that like you can only really control certain things that are within your control. And if you can't control them, then, it's probably best not to agonize about them. Or if your market is collapsing, it's time to pivot, right? So, yeah, hopefully that was helpful.
Yeah. I think one thing that you've brought up, and then I've heard Tim bring up a lot too, is not every company is investable. Do you kind of have like any guidelines for people out there around like, hey, this might not be investable versus this? Are there any kind of sort of maybe like micro guidelines that you would use for that, or is it just we'll know when we see it? And that's totally a fair answer.
No. I mean, I think we've already covered some of the questions around choice of like business model. Some businesses are just like the business that I run, TheMilVet, is not a venture business, right? It's a cash flowing business. So we would not raise venture capital because it wouldn't be the best application of that type of funding. It's also very expensive funding. People cut you a check for a percentage of your company, and then oftentimes they'll be accompanied by a board seat, so they'll get a say in how it's run. Not always, but often. And so, I mean, it's expensive. Like you're going to give up a very big piece of your company for cash. And so if you can organically grow, it's just like certainly a better avenue of approach for most founders, unless you are in one of those markets that really relies on network effects. So like if I was building LinkedIn at the same time Reid Hoffman was, and he raised a bunch of venture capital money, he's going to capture that market if he moves quicker and executes well. Whereas I can execute really, really well, but if people are not getting onto the platform with speed, then I might not be able to establish those network effects. So yeah, I mean, choice of business model, I would say, is a huge one. There are other things that make a business not investable, types of corporate governance. So like choice of business entity, if you're going to raise venture capital dollars, it has to be a C Corp. Can get into the nuanced reason why that is the case if that's interesting, but an LLC almost will never raise venture capital money. It does happen, but you usually have to put something in place to make sure that the profits of those businesses are not going to flow through the venture fund to its limited partners, because those limited partners are oftentimes nonprofits, which can be a really big problem for them from a tax perspective. So like choice of entity is really important. The founders themselves. So like if the founder doesn't have a clean record or has some kind of history of misconduct or something like that, it's just not investable, because you're really trusting that person to be a good steward of your capital. Those are the ones that come immediately to mind, apart from the things that we already discussed around, founder, market, the actual product itself, etc.
And then I guess kind of lastly, is there anything that you want to share about kind of MilVet context, Paint True, just kind of wrap it up?
Yeah, the company that I run, the Military Veteran, we help companies hire veterans, and we help veterans transition into new careers. We do that through hosting in-person networking events. Our in-person networking events are a fantastic way to come and build your network. We bring in amazing speakers to talk about how they built their business careers, the challenges that they faced along the way, and how they've overcome them. So I think that being able to go to one of these events can be inspiring and educational. You'll learn about different career paths. You'll learn about different opportunities in business that you might not have been aware of. And then you'll be inspired by virtue of the fact that you can succeed in business if you're a military veteran. I wholeheartedly believe that. So the folks that come to our in-person events do leave feeling inspired and educated. The other way that we help companies hire and folks get new careers is through direct placement. So companies will come to us and ask us to help them hire for a specific open business position. We'll advertise those roles in our newsletter. So if you're not subscribed, go to themilvet.org, TheMilVet.org.
And I will link it.
Perfect. Thanks, Rich. To subscribe to our newsletter where we post new jobs every week. Context Ventures, we want to invest in world-class military veteran business entrepreneurs. So if you're starting a new company and it makes sense based on what we've talked about in this conversation about companies that make sense to raise venture capital, we want to hear from you. Go to contextvc.com to learn more about our fund. We also host the Military Veteran Startup Conference, which is how we first met. Hopefully you can give an honest take on what that event was like. We think it's a great event. We hope that people will join us there. That happens in February in San Francisco. And yeah, Paint True, my first business that I launched. We help people take their favorite photos and have them expertly hand painted by a professional artist to make great gifts for special occasions. So if you're looking for a great gift, we hope you go to Painttrue, PAINTRU.com. And check out our services. They make really, really special gifts. People literally weep when they open them. So it's a really thoughtful thing to do for someone.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks. I guess that'll kind of wrap it up. And I'll put all those links down in the description of the videos, everything like that. And yeah, I had a great time at the TheMilVet Startup Conference that I went to. Excited to go again in February. And yeah, I guess that's a wrap.
Good. Well, we're looking forward to seeing you there, Rich. Thanks for taking the time today.